Hey everybody, it's Dr. Osborne. Welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Tonight we're going to be talking about meat versus vegetarian diets versus meat-based diets. Which ones are healthier? Which ones have risks or pose risks? What are the risks involved? And again, before we even get into tonight's show, because this is a really hot topic and a lot of people are very motivated on one side of this or the other, I want to just simply say this. There is no one right for everyone. Not everybody needs to be on a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet. Not everybody needs to be on a largely meat-based diet. Different people are different and have different needs, and that's really what we're going to be diving into tonight. So this is not a conversation to polarize you on one side or the other. This is just a conversation to give you the information so that you can make a better decision on whether or not a vegetarian diet is the right move for you or whether or not a meat-based diet is going to be a better move for you. So before we get into the show, make sure if you haven't already, go over to glutenfreesociety.org at some time. You don't have to do it right this minute. Make sure you have signed up for our gluten-free survival kit. Lots of free information and handouts for you on navigating the gluten-free diet in a healthy fashion. Also want to make sure if you don't already have a copy of No Grain, No Pain, you can go to Amazon and pick that up. You can also pick that up at major booksellers like Barnes & Noble. It is the kind of the backdrop to everything that we teach here on the Pick Dr. Osborne Brain Show. And then additionally, make sure you're subscribed. If you don't get our notifications for these live feeds, click that button above and make sure you hit that little alarm bell and make sure that you're getting notifications when we're going live. That way you'll never miss an episode. So before we dive in, want to make sure that you're hearing me loud and clear as well. So if you can hear me, go ahead and type in yes that you can hear me. And let me know where you're from. While you're letting me know that you can hear me, let me know where you're from in the world. What part of the country, what part of the world are you tuning in from? And we'll get started on this. So, looks like I'm coming in loud and clear. We've got folks chiming in now. Veronica from Chicago. Hi, Misty from the Scleroderma Group. Nice to see you back this week. All right. We've got Brigitte from Perth, Western Australia, chiming in, and Patrice from the UK, all the way. Lots of folks from across the pond tonight. And we've got Cheryl from New Jersey, and Alan from Houston, and Nicole from Illinois, and Yami from Knoxville, Tennessee, and Tracy from Milwaukee, and Christy from Conroe, Texas, and Jan from Northeast Pennsylvania, and Maxine also from Pennsylvania. So keep letting me know. I like to know. I like to keep a running tab on how many people we're reaching. Remember, here at drpeterosborne.com and glutenfreesociety.org, our goal is to help 100 million chronically sick people find real answers. And our reach is wide, but we need your help expanding it. So make sure also that you are sharing this feed with somebody who may find help from this particular topic tonight on meat versus vegetarian-based diets. So first, let's just start off with the fundamental premise of why there's even this split. There's this dichotomy. You'll see some people that say, you know what, if I stop eating meat, my energy is very lethargic, I can't function, I have brain fog, I just don't feel well. And then there's the other side of the equation where we'll have people that say, I've been following this vegetarian diet for a really long time, and when I switched over to a vegetarian diet, I felt better. My digestion improved. I was no longer constipated. I was no longer developing acne. So again, it's not one versus the other in terms of one being right or one being wrong. It's whether or not one is wrong or right for you. So we're going to dive into those rights and wrongs. We're also going to dive into some pearls and pitfalls around both of these diets. What are some of the things that you need to be cautious about if you're following a vegetarian diet? And what are some of the things you need to be cautious about if you're following a purely meat diet? So let's start with number one. If you're following a vegetarian diet, there are some risk factors associated with vegetarian diets. Now, I want to define out, because some people don't realize there are different types of vegetarianism. There's veganism, which is purely a plant-based diet. So there's no meat and no animal byproducts at all. So there would be, in this type of diet, there would be nothing like milk or cheese. Those are animal-based products. There would also be obviously no meats. But then you have lacto-vegetarian, and that would include or incorporate dairy-based products. Then you have pesco-vegetarian, which would include fish as the meat and not red meats or things like turkey or chicken or egg, etc. You've got ovo, which is an egg-based vegetarian diet, so not eating meat but definitely eating eggs. So there are different varieties of vegetarianism. And so when I'm talking about them as a whole, I'm going to really primarily be talking about this tonight, this veganism which is not using any animal product at all. Because some of the risks associated with a vegan-based diet, and if you're on a vegan-based diet, look, don't take these things personally. Just know that there are some risks, and if you appropriately do the right things within your diet and you feel better on a vegan diet, there are just some things I would recommend that you have some follow-up checks done with your doctor. There are some nutritional deficiencies that you can be at risk for developing. B12, zinc, vitamin B6, an amino acid called L-methionine is a common deficiency on vegetarian diets. Iron can be a common deficiency on vegetarian diets. So these are some of the primary nutrients that if you're following a very strict vegan-based diet, you can be low in these things. And again, that should say 6, not C. Let's just make that change. So again, why is that important to understand? Because many people go on a vegan-based diet to reduce their risk of heart disease. And so one of the things that can happen when you become deficient in vitamin B12 and vitamin B6 is you can get an elevation in a chemical called homocysteine. So you can get increased levels of homocysteine if these levels of B12 and B6 start to drop. Now, homocysteine is a chemical that any doctor can measure, but it's an independent risk factor for heart disease and stroke and diabetes and bone loss and cancer. So if your reasoning for going on a vegan diet is to reduce your risk of chronic degenerative diseases, know that these two things that can elevate your homocysteine can actually increase your risk for certain chronic diseases, and you'd want to know that. Why? Because maybe you do feel better on this diet, but you can certainly measure B12, B6, and homocysteine levels. It's very, very easy to do, and it's something that I would highly recommend that you do a couple of times a year, about every 6 months, just to make sure that your diet is providing that, because there's no amount of vegetarian-based or vegan-based B12 that is going to be as ideal as a methylcobalamin in terms of its ability for your body to be able to use it and absorb it. Now, some people do things like yeast to supplement their B vitamins on a vegan diet, which is, it can be acceptable, but again, it's still not a substitute for some of the meat-based types of vitamin B12. And a lot of people say, well, wait a second, B12 is not meat. No, it isn't. B12 is a breakdown. It's a bacterial byproduct. So the bacteria on the meat actually produce the B12. You can't get that from the bacteria. You can't take a probiotic that's going to help you, make all the B12 that you need. It's actually found in the meat. So again, some people go to yeast because yeast can be a source of B vitamins, including B12, and that can be one element of a vegan diet that might be helpful. And this is one of the reasons why so many people, though, when they go vegan, they actually gravitate more toward, one of these 3 options. It's because from the perspective of making sure you don't have these deficiencies, these 3 can prevent those deficiencies a little bit easier than a pure vegan diet. So again, just know that these things can be measured. Now, zinc deficiency is another one. This is very important, and the reason why with a zinc deficiency can reduce your capacity to fight infection. So this really affects and impacts immune function, and it can in a very, very bad way. Zinc, and those of you who maybe are pregnant and you are on a vegan diet trying to foster pregnancy, understand that that's where you can really up your risk. If you're doing this on a pregnancy, you need to make sure these things are being measured so you can supplement accordingly. And make sure that you take caution, because again, without these nutrients, there are risks for birth defects. There are risks for problems with the child in utero and the development of the child. So just take caution and make sure you measure these things. But zinc, it's responsible for about 200 different chemical reactions in the body. Immune function is one of those major reactions. Zinc serves as a primary antioxidant driver, so it drives your antioxidant function. There's a system in your body called SOD, superoxide dismutase, and zinc runs that system and keeps it healthy. So you don't want to run out of zinc. Zinc also regulates insulin, so you can't produce insulin without zinc, and zinc regulates testosterone. So men that are out there will sometimes see vegan diet-based men that are struggling with lower testosterone because they've never had their zinc checked. They've never known to do it. So again, if you're following this kind of diet, simple to check it, and it's easy to supplement with it, and I would highly recommend that you do so. Now, methionine is an amino acid, and one of its roles is in the production of something called glutathione. Glutathione is your master antioxidant, and it's what think of it like this, it's what your liver uses, glutathione, to take out the trash every day. So your body constantly building up, metabolic waste. That trash has to be emptied. So just like in your house, the trash can, if it fills up and it's going to start to rot and putrefy and stink, and it's going to start to create bacterial problems and everything else, well, you take the garbage out, right? Well, your liver takes the garbage out for your body, and it uses glutathione, and it's produced in part as a result of methionine. Now, methionine is also a critical amino acid that's responsible for a number of other functions like protein synthesis and lipid metabolism, so it helps your body produce the proper types of fats. You also need methionine to produce and replicate DNA and RNA. So for cellular turnover, for your cells to make new cells, you've got to have DNA and RNA, and for that to happen, you need methionine. And again, I'm not saying you can't get methionine on a vegetarian or vegan-based diet. It's just, again, it's an increased risk for deficiency because there's not as much in a vegan-based diet. And then you've got iron. Iron here, an iron deficiency, and we're going to talk about iron and meat in just a minute, but an iron deficiency, what is that? That can lead to a lot of different problems, predominantly anemia, iron deficiency anemia, which can cause a reduction in your capacity to deliver oxygen to your tissues. O2 is oxygen here. And that oxygen, if you're not getting oxygen to the brain, then you get tired, you get fatigued, you get shortness of breath, you get brain fog. If you're not getting iron to the rest of your organs or tissues, you're not healing as well, you're more lethargic, your muscles can hurt, you can start to develop joint pain. So iron deficiency can be a real big problem for many people. Again, if you're not checking your red blood cell counts, your white blood or your hemoglobin, your hematocrit, your ferritin, your iron, your total iron in your bloodstream, those are things that you can use to measure it. Now, it's very important to understand that those at greatest risk here are females, and the reason why females are at greater risk is because of cyclic blood loss, right? When you have your period, that blood loss equates to iron loss because that's where most iron is. It's stored in your red blood cells. So when you lose blood, through a cycle, then, you can end up having a much greater risk of developing an iron deficiency if the diet is already very low in iron from animal-based foods. Some of the iron can be found in plants. Remember, it's not that, again, what I'm not saying here is that aside from B12, right? B12 is predominantly, you're not going to find that in a plant. But these things you can find in plants. It's just that they're not as high in plants as they are in meats, and this is where the increased risk comes from. So that being said, there's iron in things like spinach. If you're ever a fan of the old Popeye cartoons, chug the spinach and his muscles get really big. Iron is rich in spinach, but the problem with some of the plant-based irons is that they're bound by phytates and oxalates. So it's harder to absorb that iron from some of those plant sources. The same thing goes with zinc. It can be harder to absorb those from plant-based sources. So again, this is where there's an increased risk. So just, again, go to your doctor, ask them to run and measure these different tests. Ask them to look at your B12 and your zinc and your B6 and your methionine, plasma amino acid, methionine level, and iron, as well as ferritin that you can actually run here. You can run something called an iron panel with ferritin, and that should help you understand what your iron levels are and what they're doing. You can also have them run a CBC, what's called a complete blood count, because that looks at your red blood cells and your hemoglobin and your hematocrit, which help you understand about whether or not you're properly producing iron. These B vitamins can be checked intracellularly. Make sure that your doctor's running them intracellular testing. And then homocysteine is a blood test. And zinc can be done the same way. It can be checked intracellularly. Methionine, it's a plasma test, so it's a blood draw. It's a plasma amino acid test. So those things, again, very easy to measure, very, very simple. If your doctor has any understanding at all about nutrition, this is a really, really easy thing to do. Just make sure that you ask for it if you're following this type of diet. Even if you're here, or here, ask for it once to twice a year. My recommendation is twice a year. It just keeps your nutrition dialed in and even better. And so again, why would somebody go vegetarian or vegan? Let's back up just a minute. Some people make the decision because it's a religious implication, and some people make it for health reasons. And I'm not trying to convince anybody here to go vegan or not go vegan. This is a decision that you should make, but I also want you to understand that some people are not genetically suited for veganism, and it's very, very important that you understand whether or not that's you. And I'm going to kind of give you some tips without lab testing, because you can have certain testing done to try to help you determine this. And for that, I would recommend you work with a functional medicine doctor. But as far as symptomatology, so if you struggle with meat, if you find that eating meat does create acne, I mentioned these symptoms earlier, if it creates acne and severe constipation type issues, if you feel more sluggish and mentally lethargic, if you get a lot of gas and bloating and stomach pain when you eat meats, you might be one of those people that are genetically suited for veganism. And there are a lot of people out there that are. So I would say if those are the types of symptoms that you're having, this would prompt me, in my opinion, for you, this would prompt a conversation to have with a good functional medicine doctor about running the appropriate test to discern this, help you to discern this. Of course, always you want to listen to your body. If you feel better not eating it, you want to go that direction. You just want to make sure that you're measuring these components as well. So I'm going to pause there because we're kind of in a crossroad here, and I want to see if there's any core questions that have come out about this. So man, the questions are flowing faster than I can actually read them. Let's see here. Oh, I'm glad Veronica's chiming in that she got rid of reflux on veganism or on a vegan diet, but she went on a heavy processed diet. And I think I'm glad you bring that up, because this is one of the cardinal mistakes that people make on a vegan diet, is that they don't really go on a healthy vegan diet. They go on what I call a grainitarian diet, which is largely grain-based foods that are packaged, right? And we're talking about like packaged corn and wheat and oatmeal and things of that nature. Highly processed, grain-based foods. They're not really eating a lot of vegetables. They're buying stuff out of boxes, and that's not healthy. If you're going vegan to be healthy, know that if you're doing that, that's absolutely not healthy. French fries, just because they're not cooked in a meat-based oil, does not mean they're healthy. They're still fried in genetically modified corn or soy oil most of the time, and they're just not good. Fried food, as a rule of thumb, as a regular staple in the diet, is definitely not a good thing to consume. So again, if you're going vegan for health reasons and you're going in that grainitarian direction, I see so many people that have tried the vegan diet and this is where they were, and they come to see me and they're very sick as a result of this, not necessarily because a vegan diet wasn't the right fit, but because they went on an unhealthy vegan diet. So again, the premise in all of this is you can do this in a healthful way. You can also do it in a hurtful way. A lot of people do it without guidance, and they don't really know how to navigate it, or they don't have anybody guiding them through it, and they end up doing this, and that's a horrible idea. I've also seen people do like where they go fruitarian diets, and this can be a big problem too, because if you're only eating fruit, it's pure fructose and glucose, and that can tend to lead to problems in the GI tract that lead to yeast overgrowth, among other things. And that, again, that can be a problem as well. It's not that fruit in and of itself is healthy, but if you limit yourself to only fruit, it can pose a problem. So going vegan, it's important that you understand there's a good way to do it, there's a healthy way to do it, and there's an unhealthy way to do it. It's the same thing for gluten-free diets, and you've heard me preach this for years if you've been following me for any length of time. You can go on a gluten-free diet that is extremely unhealthy, that's full of processed foods, and you're not going to restore health. Remember, the 3 cardinal rules of nutrition, and I wrote about this in No Grain, No Pain, is rule number one, the most important rule. You cannot get healthy eating foods that are not healthy. So it doesn't matter what kind of diet you're following. If you're gravitating away from healthy choices, whether it's vegan, whether it's gluten-free, or whether it's a meat-based diet, it won't matter. You've got to choose healthy foods in order to be healthy. It's a cardinal rule of nutrition. Yeah, so a lot of you, I see some people saying, yeah, I take B12 injections, and that's what some vegans do. They get B12 injections. Now, on that note, and if I can get Alan to put up a link for you guys. Look, B12 injections, it's not that I'm opposed to them, but a lot of times they have added fillers. I've actually, things like potassium sorbate and other, which is a form of benzoic acid, which is a preservative. It's not good to inject that stuff into your body. A lot of your liquid B12s have those same types of preservatives in them. In addition, a lot of your B12 injections are cyanocobalamin with a C. So it's not a great form of B12 to inject. It's just not as metabolically ready for your body to use. So then your body has to struggle to try to get it ready to use it. So a better form of B12 would be like a hydroxycobalamin or a methylcobalamin or an adenosylcobalamin. And I like the lozenges. In my experience, you don't need to get injections. A lozenge, if it's the right kind and it's the right dose, will absorb through the cheeks and directly into the bloodstream. So you don't have to puncture the skin and run the risk of an infection with regular injections. So a good B12 lozenge can do the trick if it's highly bioavailable form. And so I have a couple different kinds. One is called hydroxycobalamin, another one is called Ultra B12. Both of those as lozenges absorb through the mucous membrane in your cheeks and get direct access to your bloodstream without having to do the injection. So if you found yourself doing injections and you're tired of getting needles stuck in you, you might want to consider that oral supplementation as well. Soon Thomas is asking about the blood type diet. That there's actually, one of the clinical things that I have seen, at least, again, my own observations in my clinic with people, working with people for the last 18 plus years, is that people, generally speaking, with type A blood types do better on a pesco vegetarian-based diet, meaning they just gravitate better. They don't digest the red meats as well. Again, it's one of the genetic markers that can be looked at is that type A. So in regards to that question, which was blood type diet, if those of you who aren't familiar, there's a book called Eat Right for Your Type, and it's written by Dr. Peter Diadamo, refers to blood typing as trying to make food decisions based on your blood type. Again, I have seen this type A correlation very strongly in people that tend to do much better going on a vegetarian diet versus a meat-based diet. Those type A's tend to just have a lot of GI symptoms and a lot of problems and really, really struggle aggressively with a meat-based diet. Now, some people will struggle with a meat-based diet not because of genetics, and that's why I said earlier I prefer that those of you listening get with a good qualified functional medicine doctor who knows the right types of labs and testing to order and run and knows how to interpret those, because some people over here in this spectrum, they're eating meat, but they have low stomach acid. And with that low stomach acid, they don't digest the meat. And they don't have low stomach acid because it's a genetic problem. They just have low stomach acid because they've been damaging their stomach by putting the wrong foods in it. So when they put something like meat in the stomach that requires a lot of acid to be broken down, and their parietal cells are damaged. Remember, the cells in the stomach are called parietal cells, and those are the ones that secrete HCl, hydrochloric acid, to help you break down that protein in your stomach. Then what can end up happening is you can feel bad eating the meat, yet it's still not a good move for you to be over here. You feel better over here, but your body requires some of those nutrients from meat in greater quantities. And the real issue is there's damage to the stomach lining, and this can happen for several different reasons. There are certain types of infections that can hinder the stomach acid production. There are also medications that can hinder it, like antacids, Tums, and Rolaids, and Prilosec, and Tagamet, and Zantac, and Nexium are just examples of stomach acid reducing medications. Those of you who struggle with chronic external allergies understand that antihistamine medications can actually suppress stomach acid too. So if you're taking things like Benadryl, those types of medications are antihistamines and can interfere with the way that you produce stomach acid. So you want to understand that you could be doing something else that's creating your inability to digest that meat, and it may not be you needing to do that genetically because it's a better thing for you to do. It may be because your gut's damaged, especially people with a history of celiac disease or other inflammatory bowel diseases where we know those things, that damage can reach up into the esophagus and into the stomach as well. A lot of times what happens, years of chronic gluten exposure, for example, can damage these cells and put a person in a compromised position where they're not able to produce stomach acid as effectively. In these scenarios, again, this is why I recommend working with somebody who knows what they're doing, because in these scenarios, supplementing with betaine hydrochloride might be a good idea. I use something called Ultra Acid, which is a mixture of betaine hydrochloride and some other things, that if you've got damage in the stomach and you supplement with this and the meat meat-eating diet, or I say meat-eating diet, it's not that you're just eating meat. I don't recommend a carnivorous diet for humans. It should be a mixture of meat and veg if meat is right for you. But supplementing sometimes with an acid-based supplement, some people use ACV, apple cider vinegar, and it helps improve their digestion when they find that they're eating things like chicken, turkey, or beef, or lamb, etc. So again, if you find yourself with meat struggling to digest it, this is a possibility for many people, just trying this and seeing if that gives you any improvement. But again, getting with the right doc and getting the right types of tests done to discern whether or not you fall on one side of this equation or the other is the smartest thing that you can do without having to guess it. So here's one. This is what happened to me. I was vegetarian for 8 years and my ferritin was 4.8, but hemoglobin 12. I ended up in the hospital very sick, hair falling out. I believe that I have gluten sensitivity and I cannot absorb the vitamins I needed. Thank you for all your information. You're welcome, Lisa. So that's a classic story, though. You know how many times I've heard that story where somebody was trying a vegan diet. It wasn't the right genetic fit for them. They ended up with such almost non-existent iron and ferritin levels, and they landed up in the hospital because it can be a very critical and dangerous situation to get there. So again, this is why I'm emphasizing that if you are following this diet, just run the tests. It's very simple to do, and you can follow the diet and be safe with following the diet. I did want to talk about something else that I didn't really talk about on this side, and then we'll get back to meat. And that is, let's draw another line here. That is protein deficiency. This is a big one. And again, one of the things you want to understand is that protein is a macronutrient, and there are about roughly 22 different amino acids. Amino acids are the subfractions of protein. In essence, different amino acids combine together to form different types of proteins. And there are about 22 different amino acids, but 10 of these amino acids are essential, meaning we can't survive without them. We can't live without them. We would die without these 10 essential. Now, from the 10 essential amino acids, we can make the other 12, but we need these 10 in our diets on a regular basis. And so, again, sometimes with a vegetarian diet, especially if you're eating one of these grainitarian or fruitarian or really limiting your food choices and your food selection, it can be hard to get those 10 essential amino acids in enough quantity. So people actually become protein malnourished and they'll start to lose their hair. Their immune systems will start to crash. They'll catch any cold or any flu. All somebody has to do with a cold or flu is just walk by them and they'll catch it because their immune systems are so distraught. So that's just another thing that can happen, again, if you don't have a good, healthy, diverse vegan diet from great seasonal vegetables, fruits, nuts, and other foods that are going to provide that protein for you. But again, this is easy to test. Just like this methionine is easy to test. You can do an plasma amino acid test a couple of times a year, and you can find out where you fall. How are your amino acids coming back? Because if you're low in certain amino acids, let me give you an example. If you're low in tyrosine, tyrosine is an amino acid. We're running out of room here. Tyrosine is what you need. It's an amino acid. You cannot make your thyroid hormone without it. So in order to make thyroid hormone, you absolutely need tyrosine. So if you run this type of testing, you're following this type of diet, and you have a low thyroid, and you're struggling, and you don't know why, this is one reason why that could be happening. Is low tyrosine diets can lead to hypothyroidism. So again, it can get kind of complex. So it's again, I'm not saying that a vegan diet will guarantee that all these things happen. I'm just simply saying if you're gonna follow it, get with a doc and make sure you're measuring your nutrition. And that goes for this side over here. I don't care which side that you're on, you should be checking your nutrition regardless, period. It's just that these nutrients are of critical importance because so many different people following a vegan-based diet don't get enough quantity. And research has shown that to be the case. Just don't get enough quantity of those particular nutrients over time. Okay. All right, let's see here. I like this one. So Dr. McDougall says there's research on how veganism can reverse autoimmune conditions. Could it reverse gut disease enough to eat grains? Because some doctors like McDougall say meat is inflammatory. He never addresses inflammation from grains. Will reduced inflammation from cutting meat allow someone to then consume grain. Not if you're gluten sensitive. And this is where it goes back to, look, to say meat is inflammatory is untrue. You can't make that statement. You have to look at the research studies that have been done on meat, and that's a great transitionary question for this, because we just can't say that meat is inflammatory. We can't make that statement. Now, what we can say is that there are things about meat that we do to meat that can make it inflammatory. And one of the things that happens to meat is the way that it's cooked. At super high temperatures, especially if you're doing things like blackening the meat, blackened, and then a lot of people do grills where they overcook, and when you overcook the meat, that creates a substance called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAH for short, and these compounds have been linked in some studies to inflammation and cancer. But again, this is in how you prepare the meat. So it's not the meat itself that's inflammatory, because if you don't eat it overcooked, it doesn't tend to create that same type of problem. So I want you to understand that's one element. Another argument against meat is that the iron in meat is somehow going to create oxidation. There's a lot of people that are out there talking about iron as being highly oxidative. Now, what does oxidation mean? It means, think of it as a free radical. It creates damage to DNA, or it can. Now, iron can be oxidative, but iron is not oxidative unless you're over-consuming it. In essence, too much iron is oxidative, but normal quantities of iron are perfectly healthy. As a matter of fact, we just got done talking about it over here. Without adequate iron, you can't make hemoglobin to fit in your red blood cells to carry oxygen, and then game over. When you're oxygen deprived, everything else shuts down. So it's, this argument on iron being oxidative and that's why meat is bad for you is a very poor argument, and really research hasn't confirmed that that's the case, that the iron in meat is somehow more unhealthy just because it's coming from meat. And then one of the other arguments with meat is that the meat diet is high fat. Again, and that high fat somehow increases the risk for heart disease. Now, some studies do show, and these are, again, there are no definitive double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials that show that meat is absolutely dangerous, or it would have been taken off the market. It would have been taken off the market more than what it already has been. But I think it's important to understand that high fat, for some people, is the right move. And case in point, the Inuits, the Alaskan Eskimos, they eat 90% whale fat, which is very high levels of meat fat, and they don't have heart disease. They don't have cancer. They don't have diabetes. It's when they deviate from that high-fat diet that they become ill. We saw the same thing happening to the Pima Indians. So if we look at some indigenous cultural peoples, hunter-gatherers, where their high-fat diets were quite prevalent in their genetics, and their genetics allow them to eat that and allow them to process it, but they're not eating high fat in the form of highly concentrated processed fats. And I think that's an important delineation to make, because we could say that a lot of your processed meat-based foods, because of the way they're cooked, okay, and because of the additives and the other things that are in them, and because of the quality of the meat, can create and increase your risk for disease. And this is where a lot of people in the U.S. that consume a lot of meat are going wrong. They're buying the swill. They're buying the worst of the worst. They're buying the scaled farm cow meat, where you've got thousands and thousands of cows in very, very small spaces being fed mass quantities of grains, which they're not really genetically capable of digesting and processing. They're being injected with drugs, being fed hormones, and we call that meat. You have to understand that not all meat is created equal. It's kind of like with grain. There's an argument out there that, some people argue that it's not really grain, but it's all the ways that we process it. And yes, it is. It is all the ways that we process it. But for some people, it's also the gluten inherently in the grain, just like for some people who do better on a vegan diet, even eating healthy meat is a problem for them. So again, I want to get to the point that this is a very, very dynamic situation. And again, that's why I'm telling you, I'm not pro one way or the other. I personally do better with a meat-based diet, but with lots of vegetables too. But I'm not trying to pin that on anyone else. I'm not trying to advocate that that's the only way to go. You got to keep in mind, what is the quality of that meat? Because when you're reading things like the China Study and other books that are out there advocating veganism for everybody just because, you have to understand those books they're presenting a limited scope of the evidence of what research has actually shown, and what they're trying to do is paint a picture of veganism for everyone, and that's fallacy. That is not the right move for absolutely everyone to make. So you shouldn't put yourself in the category of, even my own book. Any one book is not going to be 100% accurate for any one person, because books are written from the stance of generalization. People write books to generalize their broad experiences and to try to give information to the world. But it's deeper than that, which is why we have these, every Monday we have these sessions, because I want you to understand that if you ask for the right tests, if you do the right things, if you understand who you are as a unique person, you can make the right decision for yourself and not be a victim of a diet for 5 years that may be the exact opposite of what you should be doing, and watch your health deteriorate as a result. So again, the quality of the meat matters. If it's not grass-fed, for example, we're talking about beef, if it's not grass-fed, what that does is it changes the type of fat in the meat. You're eating a high-fat omega-6 base in your diet instead of a high-fat omega-3 base in your diet, and that alters the way your body basically registers inflammation. Remember, omega-3 and omega-6 fats regulate the inflammatory cascade. So if you're eating high levels of fat from meat that's fed food that it shouldn't be fed, yeah, that's going to increase your risk for a problem. That's why we have rules around the meat. So just like you can eat an all-processed junk food, meat-based, vegetable-based diet, you can eat an all-processed vegan-based diet, and both of those diets are going to lead you down the road to poor health. So you want to understand that it's the quality. And we can't just make damning accusations about the iron in meat being oxidative, because iron is an essential nutrient that everyone needs in order to survive. I could agree with the blackening aspect. You don't want to overcook your meat. This is why so many people actually have done studies where they have compared the difference between people who overcook or do their meat well done versus people who do it rare to medium. And they found that people that do their meat rare to medium don't have quite the risk of the problems, like the cancer risk associated with overcooking your meat. So yes, there are some truths, definite truths to this information. So part of it is the quality of the meat, part of it is in how you cook it, part of it is how it's processed, part of it is what the meat is being fed and how those animals were being cared for. Because many people don't go vegetarian or vegan because of their health. They go because they love animals, and I love animals. Look, I have animals, and I love animals. I believe in responsible meat eating for me. In essence, I don't want to go to the big buffet and just gorge on as much meat and leave half a chicken set aside over here, because I think that's an irresponsible stewardship of how this is supposed to be done. So again, this can be done in an ethical way. You can have healthy animals that are properly and appropriately raised in humane conditions, being fed healthfully, having a life that's relatively healthy for them before you consume them. And I think that's the differentiation that should be made. It's a lot of people, the meat eaters get a bad reputation because many people attack them for being, for having animal cruelty in their heart, and that's just not the case. Look, some people need to eat meat, and the number one animal is you. You are the number one animal that you have to take care of, because if you can't take care of yourself, then you're going to have bigger issues than, this ethical debate on your shoulders. So, okay. Let's see here. If you've got questions. No, Leslie, I'm not rejecting every single study supporting veganism. You must have tuned in late. I'm simply saying that a lot of these broad spectrum studies that support veganism as a whole diet for absolutely everyone, that's not true. You can't make that type of claim. It's impossible to make that type of claim, and it's rather unscientific to do so. But I'm not rejecting all of the research around veganism. I'm just simply saying that veganism is not right for everyone, and there's nobody that can make that claim. Yeah, so some doctors will say if you're following a meat-based diet to measure your insulin-like growth factor 1 levels, and that if you're over 150 that you need to stop eating meat. I don't know that I agree with that. Look, every doctor's going to have their opinions. IGF-1 can be linked to cancer, but you also need IGF-1 to do a number of other things that are very important. So, again, this is not me trying to piss any of you off who are vegans. This is just simply saying, look, we can't make broad sweeping statements on either side of this equation. And if you're going to be one side or the other, you need to know which side is right for you as a unique individual, as your own unique biochemistry is going to be different than everyone else's. Okay. So we're going to open it up for some questions now. Yeah, so what I'm reading from a lot of you is just confirmation on both sides of the equation. Some of you said that you feel better eating meat. Some of you are saying that, matter of fact, let's just poll the audience and just see where you guys are at. If you feel better with meat in your diet, I'd like you to just put the word meat in a comment below for me, MEAT, hashtag meat. And if you feel better on a vegan-based diet, hashtag vegan in your comment below. And let's just see kind of where the audience is falling here. And then again, if you guys got questions, let's go ahead and get them typed in. I'd like to pull this out and just see, how many of you are meat versus vegan. Let's see. We'll let those tally. So this is just an interesting observation from Jessica. She's from Omaha, and she says that she watched the movie Forks Over Knives and read the books and thought it was the healthiest diet, but then her health deteriorated when she tried to go vegan. And again, that can happen to many people, and for many people it's the opposite. Their health improves. So, again, we're not damning anybody's dietary choices. What we're doing is saying, look, you've got to go on the diet that's right for you. So Huda's asking, what if to treat my autoimmune as a vegan, I go vegan plus phase 2 of the no grain, no pain diet? Any problems with that? No, but Huda, if you are going to do that, that's a lot of restriction, and you definitely want to make sure you're going beyond even these tests. I would go beyond these nutritional tests, and even before you started the diet, I would get a nutritional workup done that measured the 40 essential nutrients, that measures your plasma amino acids, just so you have a good fundamental place to start so that you can supplement as you make your diet change, so that you don't end up creating a worsening of any potential deficiencies that you might already have. But there's no, as long as you're monitoring, there's not really a problem with that. Question, how much do you think blood type actually plays a role in meat eaters versus none? Again, if you read Dr. Adamo's work, it plays a pretty big role. I don't think it's the only factor, but I think it's one that can be helpful to look at. So it's interesting, some of the comments that are coming back. A lot of you are saying meat, a lot of you are saying vegan, and some of you are saying better on a very low meat and mostly vegetable diet. So, there's a nice mixture of where you guys are falling. So I like this question from Brigitte. It's if you have a protein deficiency and you don't eat a lot of meat, what should you eat? So if you're protein deficient, this is where, again, if you're on a vegan-based diet or if you're on a very, very low meat diet, sometimes, again, going back and getting the right testing done, step one. Step two, once you know, if you need to bump your meat up, look, there's another factor in all of this that we really haven't talked about, and that's why I'm glad you asked that question. And that factor has to do with, let's see here, your current status. And what I mean by that is your current status in health is going to dictate whether you need to gravitate more toward more protein or gravitate away. Here's where we'll see problems. For example, somebody who's immunosuppressed, who's already somewhat protein malnourished, they do better on a vegan diet, but they're protein malnourished, so they're losing hair and they're anemic and they're sick and they've got a chronic autoimmune disease. You might have to do some supplementation, and this is one of those areas where we can get into, like, we have a vegan-based protein powder, for example, called Ultra Protein, which is made from organic pea, but it contains all of the essential amino acids that I was talking about earlier. So it contains all of the 10 essential amino acids, and it's blended specifically for vegans who are on a vegan diet but actually need more protein because their current situation is one where you remember you need protein to fuel the immune system. You need protein to build muscle mass. So if your body is wasted away from illness, sometimes we've got to deviate from your long-term diet to a short-term goal diet that's designed to get certain levels of nutrients up to get you optimized so your body has the capacity to heal. So your current situation does play a role in, you know, what decisions to make. And again, this is why I keep saying you've heard me say this probably 20 times tonight, work with a functional medicine doctor who's well versed in these things, because this is where people get in trouble. They try to go it on their own and they don't have the experience and they don't have the knowledge. And as the old saying goes, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you can go into something with the best intentions in the world, but there's another old saying, you know, the road to hell is paved with good intention. And you can create a lot of problems and a lot of damage by doing something that you shouldn't be doing, especially if you're struggling with a chronic health issue. Now, if you're healthy as a horse and you're just trying to maximize your diet, there's probably less of a risk in you playing and experimenting. But if you're down here at this very, very low point with a chronic autoimmune problem, you really probably should work with somebody to, you know, and be guided by somebody who's got experience. That's interesting. So I'm going to ask a follow-up question. So Marianne says, I used to be vegan for years, which implies to me that maybe she's not vegan now. So let me ask a follow-up question. How many of you have gone vegan and for years but didn't feel as good, or your health started to deteriorate and then you had to add meat back in to feel better? And on the other side, how many of you were eating meat for years and your health was deteriorating and you found that definitely cutting all meat out, you know, served to move you in the right direction? So here's another one. I went vegan and got sick. I was eating gluten. My hydrochloric acid was off due to H. pylori. After fixing those two things, I felt great on a vegan diet. I love that feedback, Louise, because that's exactly what I was talking about a moment ago with that hydrochloric acid issue and going vegan or not going vegan. So thank you for sharing that. Patrice is asking where she can get that protein drink. Can we put a link up in the feed for Ultra Protein? You can pick that up at glutenfreesociety.org. Again, it's a vegan-based protein that if you're following a vegan diet and you're trying to get your protein levels back up, it's a great way to go about doing that. Okay, let me switch over here. Can you tell me when the best time to take vitamins and organic enzymes for best absorption? I do not want to take too many vitamins. Well, you know, that's a great question. Some of it is dependent upon what vitamins you're talking about, because you know, there are a lot of different kinds of vitamins, and some can make you nauseous, and some are not a problem. For example, biotin, which is a B vitamin, you could take on an empty stomach and not have an issue. But if you tried to take, for example, vitamin B6 on an empty stomach, it could cause some nausea. Or zinc or iron on an empty stomach could cause nausea. So the timing depends on what you're taking. As a general rule of thumb, my advice is if you're taking enzymes to improve your digestion and absorption, try to take those digestive enzymes 10 to 15 minutes before you start your meal. And then if you're talking about vitamins, take your enzymes, start eating, eat about half your meal, then take your vitamins, then eat the other half of your meal. And that way your vitamins are being mixed with food, and the milieu within your gut is those vitamins that are coming in, even in capsules, are being worked into your food and looked at more like your food. And so there's a better opportunity for digestion and absorption when you do it that way. Great question. Let's see here. Yeah, so Elizabeth's asking, can we repost this? Yeah, we'll repost this up if you subscribe to youtube.com/glutenology, and you can actually get email reminders on when these posts come up. I like this one. So Elizabeth says, I was vegan for 4 years and was low in zinc and vitamin D despite supplementing. Became intolerant to legumes. Plus, I found out I'm blood type O. Yeah, so that would be, that would be a good indicator that the vegan diet would not be the best fit for you. There's somebody asking the audience here if anybody does raw vegan diets, and let me chime in on those, because we haven't talked about that either. And let's just talk about raw on both sides of this too. So if you're doing a raw vegan diet, because there's a lot of advocates out there saying eat everything raw because it's better for you. No, it isn't. Raw is not better. If you're talking about certain vegetables like cruciferous vegetables that can be extremely hard to digest, eating a raw-based diet can wreck the gut. It can absolutely obliterate the GI tract. But then there's another issue here. A lot of foods are contaminated with bacteria and other microorganisms that can be very dangerous to health. This is one of the reasons why we have cooking policies and why the FDA originally and the USDA and some of these other industries, governmental agencies were developed originally was to protect consumers from the risk of infection. If we go back 100 years, remember that lots of people were dying from infection, and part of the infections were coming from food, both meat and vegetables. You can, for example, raw pork and raw fish, you can pick up different kinds of worms. Raw meat, you can pick up things like E. coli. Raw eggs and chicken, you can pick up salmonella. So there are a number of different types of bacteria and other infectious microorganisms you can pick up from over-consuming raw food. My advice is you shouldn't eat your meat raw and you shouldn't eat your vegetables raw. That doesn't mean you have to overcook them either, and that's where a lot of people get into trouble. Is overcooking, kind of like what we talked about with the meat, overcooking. You can overcook vegetables, and these compounds I was talking about early, those polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, those very same compounds can be made by overheating meat, can be made by overheating vegetables. So again, it's don't overcook your food, but don't not cook your food, and don't just eat raw. Now that doesn't mean you can't eat anything raw. There's certainly things that are okay to eat raw. Make sure that you wash them appropriately, but there are certain foods that we don't do really well with. Our digestive tracts don't do really well with raw. And as on the vegetarian side, well, on the meat side, I don't recommend eating any meat raw, but on the vegetarian side, it's predominantly the cruciferous vegetables. Things like raw potato can, again, be very, very hard to digest. For many people who have FODMAP issues, FODMAP, especially when they're raw, can be extremely hard to digest and create a lot of gas and bloating and discomfort and distress of the GI tract. So again, you don't necessarily want to eat things raw just because you've heard somebody somewhere say it was healthy. We do have cooking, we do have reasons that we cook our food, and we have policies around that for trying to reduce our overall exposure and increase our risk for infection. Okay. I love the conversations you guys are having in between some of you. So, okay, so Natasha is saying, so never eat raw veggies. No, that's not what I said. What I said was, don't think that the only way that vegetables are healthy is raw. And it's not unsafe to cook them, and you don't lose a ton of nutrition when you cook them. You lose a ton of nutrition when you overcook them, and but not just for cooking them. So, again, it's not that you can't eat some raw. It's just that, again, there's a happy medium. Let's see here. When you go vegan for a little and then go back to eating meat, why do you get gassy and feel awful? Does this have to do with getting rid of the microbacteria that like meat? It seems the body doesn't like these drastic changes. Had family experiences too. There are a couple different reasons. Some people, you change your microbiome. When you feed your microbiome meat, it adapts to being able to process and digest the meat. And so when you go vegan, and then you come back, when you've gone vegan, you fed the microbiome in the opposite direction. You fed the microbiome to predominantly, you've supported the types of species of bacteria in your microbiome that do really well digesting vegetables and other plant-based foods. So yes, you can alter your microbiome based on what you eat in your diet. And this is where dramatic swings and shifts back and forth between different types of diets may not be the best idea, because you'd be suffering on the in-betweens. trying to reestablish gut flora. Again, that's why I said work with a doctor, because you want to establish up front whether you need to be on this side or whether you should, be on this side, and that way you don't have to do that yo-yoing back and forth. Okay. Well, okay, so I like this question. So what about better enzyme activity in raw vegetables? So there are enzymes in raw vegetables, but there are also bonds in raw vegetables that no matter how many enzymes that raw vegetable has, you're not breaking the bonds within that raw vegetable. This is where heat can break down some of those harder and more resistant bonds, so that your body can better process it. So although digestive enzymes are important, remember too that you do make digestive enzymes. Your brush border in your intestine produces digestive enzymes. Your pancreas makes elastase and amylase and lipase, digestive enzymes that help you break down your food. So a big part of it is how healthy is your gut and what you're putting on it. If you put, again, if you're putting a bunch of processed food that are lifeless and don't have any enzyme capacity, but they do provide calories in it, and it puts overstress on your pancreas and your other digestive organs, then you can create a scenario where you develop poor digestion as a result of overworking those organs. But the enzymes in fruits and vegetables are, although certain ones, and there again, this goes back to there are certain ones that digest themselves, and where we see this is, for example, with fruits in the summertime when certain fruits come in. Let me use an example like a papaya or a mango. They practically digest themselves when they're ripe. In essence, when you eat them, they practically digest themselves. But if you heat them in a food dehydrator and then you eat them, they can be very challenging to digest because that food dehydrator has denatured many of the enzymes in it. So it's not the best use or not the best way to go about eating that particular piece of fruit. There are examples on the opposite end of that equation though too. And so some foods are better when depending on who you are and who your digestion is, some foods are better to mildly or lightly cook them. And again, I'm going back to the cruciferous because a lot of people try to eat them raw and then pay a huge price. It's best to lightly steam them and to help break down some of the bonds in them, so that between that heat breaking down some of those bonds and the digestive enzymes that you produce, or if you want to take additional supportive supplemental digestive enzymes, you get good absorption of the nutrients from that particular food. Been taking Creon for 2 days and very gassy. Why would that be happening? The dose could be too high, Louise. You might get back with your prescribing doctor. For those of you who don't know what Creon is, it's a prescription grade pancreatic enzyme supplementation. Let's see here. Would I recommend everyone have a GI test to know if off balance with bacteria or their biome? No, not necessarily. I would recommend anyone with autoimmune disease to have that type of testing done, but I wouldn't necessarily say that everybody in the world needs to have it done. So again, it's different for different people. How do you feel about biome? And I talked about this a little bit last week because you guys asked me about certain companies, and I don't like to publicly talk bad about any particular company. I'm not a big fan, not because they may not have a good product, but because the premise of a person trying to digest the information on a test like that and to apply it clinically in a setting that improves their health is far beyond the average person's capacity to do. And I don't believe that lab and the handouts that they provide, it's kind of a lot like the 23andMe originally. They were offering up lifestyle advice based on genetics, and what they really serve to do is just confuse the hell out of a lot of people and create a market where now you have all these different companies that do genetic interpretation. At the end of the day, to me, nothing beats a relationship between a personal doctor and a person, as opposed to a company who's, again, giving broad spectrum generalizations without knowing your medical history and without knowing really anything about you, minus what you may have filled out in a questionnaire. And they're going to make all this advice based on that very short amount of information. It just doesn't make sense to me that would be the right move to take, or even the right investment to make with your money. So hopefully that's helpful. And again, that's not to pick on any one particular company who does stool testing online. It's just how I feel about any type of high complexity test that gives high complexity information. You can't work off of generalizations, and the best way to get interpretation is to have somebody who you have a relationship with, who you trust, know, and can get quality information from. Do you think it's good to take the gluten shield very often? Yeah, I mean, it depends. So if you're new to the gluten-free diet, I think you should be on gluten shield, period, for at least 3 to 4 months while you're trying to figure out what gluten-free really truly means. Those of you who've listened to me or followed me for any length of time know what I mean when I say the traditional gluten-free diet versus a true gluten-free diet. And so many people go gluten-free initially, and they're making so many mistakes within the diet. I think it's very important that they take Gluten Shield to prevent themselves from their own lack of information and knowledge. It just offers a layer or a shield or a barrier, if you will, that prevents them from being quite as sick. Now, that being said, I don't think people should take Gluten Shield as a reason to go try to eat bread or pasta or cereal or grains. I think that would be foolish. That's not what it's designed to do. No enzyme product that makes the claim that it's a gluten buster or a gluten reducer or any of that. No digestive enzyme product that's out there can make the real serious medical claim that they're going to allow you to eat gluten by taking this enzyme. And if they're making that claim, it's very, very fraudulent, and you should run away as fast as you can because they're very unethical in their marketing approach and how they're presenting that product. These digestive enzyme formulations are designed to reduce and minimize the damage from cross-contamination, not to allow you to go and dive off the wagon. Okay, I think we pushed a little bit over today. So lots of questions left. Again, those of you who didn't get your questions answered tonight, or you have additional questions, please forward those to glutenology@gmail.com. Look, we want to take care of you. We want to make sure we're getting your questions answered as best as we can with the resources that we have. So forward those on. If you've got ideas that you'd like to see me cover in future shows of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain, I'd like you to also forward those on as well. Tonight's show was actually an idea that several of you forwarded, wanted to have this conversation about meat versus vegetarianism. So this is for you all who sent that request in. And again, we're going to try to meet those requests in the future. If you haven't already subscribed, go to glutenfreesociety.org. Make sure you sign up for the world's #1 gluten-free newsletter. We've got about 500,000 subscribers and growing. So make sure you're getting that information in your inbox on a regular basis, where you can stay up to breast on all the latest research and news and views around the gluten-free world and realm and diet. And those of you who don't know, again, my mission is to help 100 million chronically sick people. I can't do it without your help. Please, please, please hit that share button. Take that URL from this video and pass it on to somebody in an email who you think might benefit from this information. Together we can save and change more lives across the world. This is Dr. Osborne with Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. I will see you next Monday, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Have a great week.